So the 1980s, as far as politics go, was the beginning of the conservative movement that we are still in the midst of. As a nation, our politics are very conservative. Obviously, we had two pretty popular two-term Democratic presidents, right? Bill Clinton in the 90s, Barack Obama. So you're like, we can't be in a conservative movement if we're having Democratic presidents. But the thing about both Barack Obama and Bill Clinton is that they had to moderate their politics and move towards the middle in order to be elected and to have, policies passed. So as a whole, our politics have been skewing right for the last 4 decades. With all the unrest that we're seeing in 2020, there's a chance that we are moving out of the conservative movement and into a more liberal era of politics, but that's something that we won't know until, a little bit further in the future. So the conservative movement aligned and was partly the result of Ronald Reagan's ascent to the presidency. So whenever we talk about the 1980s, like Ronald Reagan is, he was almost like a cult figure for Republicans and those on the right. His popularity was, some of you may still have like family members who are obsessed with Reagan. Any of y'all have that? Like I have, she's like my cousin's grandma. So like not super related to me, but like I went into her house a couple of years ago and she like still had a Reagan calendar on the wall. So like the love for Reagan still continues among conservatives. A lot of grown men cried whenever he died in 2004, I think. Anyways, so was that the year you were born? This is a handy little infographic if you are still confused on what I mean whenever I talk about left politics and right politics. They have the colors mixed up on this. The right, is the Republican Party, which is typically associated with red, right? And left would be Democrats, which are typically associated with the color blue, because that's how they show up on our electoral maps. But whenever we are talking about conservatives, those are Republicans, right? Those are people on the right. If you get to really extreme right-wing ideology, that is nationalism in the bad form of nationalism, and fascism. On the flip side, if you get to the really like far left, that is communism. Right, so that is our political spectrum. And if you're right in the middle, that makes you a moderate, someone who typically identifies as independent, doesn't go with either party, and typically votes for people from both parties. We have a lot of those in North Carolina, apparently, because, 2020, we saw North Carolina go red for Trump and red for Tillis, but then go blue for Roy Cooper. So a lot of people in North Carolina are not the ones voting straight ticket. All right, so we are going to move into a period of right politics, conservative, Republican. And these are the things that conservatives are traditionally for. A deregulated economy, focusing on business and industry, lowering taxes. These are all the things that Ronald Reagan is going to accomplish during his time as president. So the 1980 election, who is Ronald Reagan running against? Who did we last talk about before Thanksgiving? It's good old Jimmy Carter, right? So Jimmy Carter is the president in 1980. Is Jimmy Carter a popular president in 1980? No. His approval rating is 23%, because the economy continued to be really, really bad. So that is going to be the primary reason why Carter loses in 1980 is the economy, which had been in a period of stagflation for over a decade. His handling of the Iran hostage crisis also was kind of like his final nail in the coffin. Americans really did not approve of the way that he handled that hostage situation. And then whenever the rescue mission failed, the blame for that was put on Carter as well. So Ronald Reagan wins easily in 1980. We'll see the electoral map in a second. And his vice president is a man named George Bush. Is that a name we're familiar with? Should be, because we've had two presidents by that name, right? George Bush, who was Ronald's vice president. Ronald, I'm on a first name basis with Ronald Reagan. Who was Reagan's vice president is Herbert Walker Bush, who is W's dad. All right, so Ronald Reagan, conservative, obviously. I think I've said that 5,000 times already. And he was also known as the great communicator. I'll try to find, a video that really shows that, the way that he spoke and the things that he said really made Americans trust him. And they felt like he was the leader that they needed at that point in time. So his ability to communicate with the American people is part of the reason why he was so popular. So his platform is really simple. Whenever he's running for president, he is running for lower taxes to stimulate the economy, less government, decreasing the size of the federal government, and a restoration of family values and patriotism. One thing about the 1980 election is that voter turnout was super low. Out of all eligible voters in the United States, only 52% turned out to vote. So what does that tell us about Americans and their relationship with the government in 1980?
Most people probably didn't think that it was worth trying to go vote.
Okay. So they didn't think that their vote mattered, right? That, politics was politics. It could also show us that people didn't feel strongly about either two candidates. Like the people who showed out for Ronald Reagan were probably like super hardcore, but as the whole of America, right, we weren't quite into that conservative mood yet. So that popularity of Ronald Reagan was formed during his presidency, not he was elected because of that popularity. So Reagan won pretty easily. Georgia voted for Jimmy Carter because that was his home state. Minnesota was the home state of Carter's vice president, Walter Mondale, so they carried that state. West Virginia, Maryland, DC, and Rhode Island. So a total of 49 electoral votes for Jimmy Carter. So not the worst blowout we've ever seen, but one of the biggest landslides. This is Ronald Reagan. If you weren't sure, it looks just like him, but just in case.
I get this. I think I get what this is referencing to.
Okay, cool, because I was about to ask. So the caption says, "An Oscar at last." Tyler, what is this in reference to?
He was an actor before he was president, yeah?
Yes. So if you weren't
At least
aware,
I know he starred in a few movies.
yeah. Mhm. He was a very popular actor. Like he wasn't like, just some C-list actor that nobody knew. He was a very famous actor. He became California governor prior to becoming president. So that was his step into politics. Was state politics, but this is a reference to him winning an Oscar, which is being elected president, right? An Oscar at last for Ronald Reagan. All right, here, what do the elephants represent? What are elephants the symbol of in American politics?
Republicans.
Republicans, very good, right? We're familiar with the symbols, the Republican elephant, the Democratic donkey. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That little piece of knowledge, like it's not that important, right? Like that this animal symbolizes the Republican Party. But if you aren't aware of that, if you stumble across a political cartoon on the internet and they're using this kind of symbolism, you're not going to know what it means. So hopefully, right, it'll stick this time. Republican elephant, Democratic donkey. So here we see the death of liberalism, right? Like the death of democratic politics, and the Republicans are burying it. So we're going to talk about two groups that helped Ronald Reagan get elected. So first was the New Right. So this was a collection of conservative groups that focused on single issues. Have you heard that term, single issue voter?
Yes.
So that refers to someone who votes literally based on politicians' viewpoint on one subject, right? This is so important to them that that is the only thing that they are basing their vote on. So a really popular single issue, well, I guess the issue that would be the single issue for voters is abortion, right? There's a strong pro-life movement. There's also a lot of people who feel really strongly pro-choice, and that is going to be the determining factor whenever they are voting for someone. So single issue voters do not compromise on that viewpoint, right? So we're going to see a lot of single issue voters who are focused on conservative viewpoints: anti-abortion, anti-gun control, pro-death penalty, pro-school prayer. All of these are going to come to the forefront of American politics. So, with the rise of the New Right, and the moral majority is the second group we're going to talk about, religion once again came to the forefront. Many of these, the people who lean conservative were also extremely religious. And so a lot of people were disturbed by the trends that we saw in the 1970s, the increase in divorce, the increase in children born out of wedlock, a decrease of people going to church, the sexual revolution. All of these things they saw as a decline in morality. And so bringing religion back to the forefront is a way to push back against these social trends that they thought would be the death of the United States. The conservative movement also pushed back against civil rights, specifically affirmative action and school busing. Remember talking about school busing to integrate schools? These were issues that conservative politics, opposed and promised to, get rid of. The New Right also promoted school prayer, tough punishments for crimes. We're going to see a lot of people, hopefully you've already watched the Ed Puzzle, right? And we saw that increase in crime during the decade that was associated with what? What was that increase in crime in the cities associated with? Drugs, drug use. So we're going to see, a lot of people advocating for, cracking down on drug use and other crimes by having really tough punishment. So like longer prison terms, which has resulted in the mass incarceration that we see today, with America having 25% of the world's prisoners, I think, while we're only like 4% of the world's population. So other things that the New Right was against was abortion. That was a very popular topic with the New Right. The ERA and homosexuality was a big, topic of conversation during the 1980s. Anybody remember what the ERA was? The Equal Rights Amendment, right? This was put forth during the women's rights movement, an amendment to the Constitution that would say, you can't be discriminated against on account of sex. People were still pushing to add it to the Constitution in the 1980s. The New Right was against the Equal Rights Amendment. So we also saw a strengthening of the moral majority. So this was a group that was closely linked to religion. Have y'all heard the name Jerry Falwell before? He was a popular preacher in the 70s and 80s, and he was the leader of the moral majority. You may be familiar with his son, who until just a couple of months ago was the president of Liberty University, but then there was like a scandal, so he stepped down. Anyways, it was his father that led the moral majority. So we are going back to fundamentalism. Y'all remember talking about Christian fundamentalism? We talked about it in the 1920s. What does it mean to be a religious fundamentalist? Okay, so the technical definition of fundamentalism, right, is believing that every word of the Bible is the literal truth, right? So like all the stories that happen, like that actually happened in history, like not an allegory for anything. But also, more broadly, a religious fundamentalist is someone who like strictly adheres to the rules of religion, and feels like everybody else should as well. So there's going to be a push for American laws that align more closely with Christianity. The moral majority also promotes family values. By that, they mean families consisting of a mother and father who are married, and, their little nuclear family. Family values typically was like a dog whistle, like against like homosexuality, condemning that. The moral majority raised lots of money for conservative politicians. So we are going to see a stronger connection between Christianity and politics during the 1980s. Any questions so far, or thoughts, comments? One thing that I meant to say at the beginning, Ronald Reagan is someone who has, and most presidents do, a very divided legacy, right? Some people, like my family member who has a Reagan calendar, right, believes he is the greatest president that we ever had, right, and should be put on Mount Rushmore. But there's a lot of people who think Reagan was terrible. So his legacy is pretty much divided based on which side of the political spectrum that you fall on. However, what can't be disputed is the way that he transformed American politics. The way that he won by such a wide margin is by attracting new voters to the Republican Party that had typically voted Democrat. And so that's what's going to strengthen the Republican Party throughout the conservative movement. All right, so one of the main things that Reagan has to do as president is fix the economy of the 1970s, which had been stuck in a period of stagflation. We're beginning to see the trend of businesses moving overseas. Why does a business move overseas?
A lot of the time it's cheaper to produce overseas.
Yes. So like you can pay people very little money to the point of like exploitation of people in other countries who don't have things like a minimum wage, right? In the United States, unions typically fight for higher wages. So that cuts into the profits of a business. So that's why we see a trend of businesses going overseas, because that allows them to make higher profits. So that trend was beginning in the 1970s. The cities of Detroit and Chicago lost 50% of their manufacturing jobs. So imagine how devastating that is for one city to lose 50% of their jobs. You know, like the people are still there, but there are no jobs for them. So you're going to see a lot of people move out of Detroit and Chicago. See the declining of what we call the Rust Belt, where there used to be a lot of manufacturing that moved overseas and left those people unemployed. New York City almost faced bankruptcy. The two oil shocks of the 1970s left gas prices really high. That's contributing to all the inflation, which is at 10%, which is really high. Unemployment hovered between 10 and 20% during this decade. Whenever you're getting to 20% unemployment, that is almost Great Depression levels. So the economy really was extremely bad. Reagan's remedy to this economic problem is changing the government's relationship with business. So Reagan and other people who, I guess Republicans, conservatives, those on the right, stuck to the mantra that government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. This is rhetoric that you still hear a lot today, right? So decreasing the size of the federal government and limiting their ability to, you know, impact your life will fix a lot of the problems, right? Because if government is the problem, take it away, problem's no longer there. So what Ronald Reagan wanted to do was reduce the size of the federal government. Whenever I say that, what do I mean? How do you reduce the size of the federal government? So it typically means, right, cutting government programs, cutting government agencies that are seen as wasteful, like reducing the size of government agencies so they have less employees, which means that you don't have to put as much of your budget into paying federal employees. That's typically what we mean by reducing the size of the government. Also, reducing government's impact on people's lives. And so a big part of this was deregulating the economy. Okay, stick with me. I'm about to talk about economics, which is difficult for us to understand, right? Economics is so big that most of us don't have a full understanding of economics. But this is probably the most important thing for you to learn from the Ronald Reagan era, because these are still the conversations that we're having today. All right, whenever you are casting a vote, especially at the national level, you are voting for what type of economic system you want America to have. The jury is still out on which is the best economic theory, right? Like there are economists on both sides who believe that this is the best way to cause a boom in the economy. So we're going to talk about economics. And if you have questions or need me to explain something further, please ask, because somebody else probably has the same question as you. All right. So what does it mean to regulate something?
Like control it to a certain point.
Okay. Yeah. So control, right? To intervene and change things if they're not going the way that you like. So since the 1930s, there had been a lot of government regulation of the economy, right? In part to fix the problems that had led to the Great Depression, but also to make sure that people were paid livable wages, imposing a minimum wage as part of regulating the economy. So Republicans wanted to deregulate the economy and still do, right? That is the Republican view of economics. So a focus on free enterprise, which we talked about during the Gilded Age, right? As being one of the reasons why the economy boomed so much. Right? So if you deregulate the economy, if you take the restrictions off of businesses, they'll be able to make more money. Y'all remember talking about this? Whenever we were talking about the Gilded Age and the Progressive Era, right? You allow business to boom, you tell them to do what they do to make as much money, but who tends to see the bad side of that? Whenever we allow business to do whatever they can to make as much money as possible, who tends to get hurt by that?
Normally, people, just normal people,
Right, like
especially like workers.
the workers, right? So the same problems that we saw during the Gilded Age are going to resurface whenever we deregulate the economy. So this is referred to as supply side economics. It has since become known as Reaganomics because of Ronald Reagan's use of it in the 1980s. So it's associated very strongly with his presidency. Another nickname for it is trickle-down economics. And if you are critical of supply-side economics, you might call it voodoo economics, because it's not, it doesn't work quite as well as it seems like it should on paper. All right, so here's what supply side economics is all about. You start with cutting taxes. So Ronald Reagan is going to cut taxes by 25%, mainly for the wealthy. So cutting down the amount of taxes the wealthy have to pay, but also at all tax levels. We saw this happen again in 2017. One thing that most people are not aware of with the tax cuts of 2017 is that the tax cuts for the wealthy and for businesses are permanent. But for people who make less than $77,000 a year, their taxes are going to begin increasing again next year. That was written into the bill in 2021. So whenever your taxes, if your family starts talking about your taxes going up in 2021, it's from the bill in 2017 that was passed. So you cut taxes for the wealthy. People will have more money to spend because they are paying less taxes. The wealthy will create more jobs because they'll have more money to spend, and all of this will cause the economy to grow. It's called trickle-down economics because the idea is if you cut taxes primarily for the wealthy, those are the people that create jobs. And so that wealth will trickle down to the middle class and the working class. All right, so what can't be disputed about supply side economics is that it does make the economy boom. All right, the 1980s, we are going to see an economic boom. What is still debated is how well that wealth trickles down. A lot of average people would say that it doesn't trickle down at all. A lot of families in the 1980s are going to see their wages and their take-home pay decrease despite the fact that they were paying less in taxes. The amount of poverty is going to increase. But the economy as a whole will boom. Right? Wall Street will do really well. There will be more jobs. It's just that those jobs pay less money. Does that make sense? All right, so what is pictured here? What is this? Not what it represents, but what actually is it?
The guy standing outside of a dam.
A dam. Yeah, that's what I was talking about, this thing. So this is a dam, right, which blocks water and creates reservoirs. This guy is saying, trickle down already. He is waiting for some water. Is it going to trickle down with the dam there? Will water get past the dam?
No.
No. Right? And so the dam represents corporate profits. So this is someone, are they in favor of supply side economics or are they critical of it? Critical, right? They're saying that the money is staying in corporate profits, right? Those at the top are getting wealthier and wealthier, making more money, and it's not trickling down to the rest of the people. So in the first couple of years of Reagan's presidency, things are going to get worse before they get better. So this cartoon, we see this guy here representing record unemployment. Mr. President, there's a fellow here who'd like to answer your question. Are you better off now than you were a year ago? So I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, but Ronald Reagan, one of his best known campaign slogans was asking the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? So referring to the fact that, you know, things hadn't gotten better under Carter. So this is a year into Reagan's presidency, right? And things have actually gotten worse. So there's going to be continued recession until the boom starts in like 1983. So another thing about supply side economics, all right? whenever you cut taxes, you are cutting government revenue, right? Our taxes go to the government to pay for things like the military and Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare, for the building of bridges and roads and paying teachers, right? Those are the things that taxes pay for. So Ronald Reagan is going to start cutting entitlement programs. So this is a word that collectively refers to things that help out poor people. Welfare, food stamps, Medicaid, all of those things are going to see a decreased budget. So overall, he cut $40 billion from entitlement programs, out of the $300 billion that was spent yearly in 1980. However, he also increased the size of the military. So the money that was being saved from cutting that part of the budget is being spent on the military instead. So if you are practicing supply side economics and you cut taxes, but you don't cut government spending, you end up with a deficit. And that's what we saw in, I'm going to go forward a little bit before I go back, just because I feel like it's helpful to see. Do y'all know what a deficit is? If you have a budget that's running on a deficit, it means that you are spending more money than you make. So in 1980, we were running a deficit, but it was 75 billion, just 75 billion, no big deal. We see at the height of Reagan, 1986, that has grown to $225 billion. Billion with a B. So the government was spending $225 billion more than they were bringing in. This is one of the main criticisms of supply side economics and of Reagan specifically, is that he cut taxes, but never cut spending enough to run a balanced budget. We see that under his successor, George Bush, that deficit grows even more. Y'all, in 1992, the federal government was spending almost $300 billion more than it took in. We see it start to decline. That was under Bill Clinton's presidency. And he actually ran a balanced budget. We got to the point where we were spending as much money as we brought in. So if you cut taxes, you also have to cut spending, or else you're going to end up where we are right now. How much is America's debt at currently? Let's see if the debt calculator is still going. What is America? Yes. It was, oh, we are at $27 trillion. Yep. God, can't even fathom how much that is, right? Because a billion is 1,000 millions. And then so a trillion is 1,000 billions. Like, that number is too huge for us to even like conceive. Anyways, so that's how we get there, right? These years that we are spending $300 billion more than we are making, that is going to add up over the years. It wasn't just this period, right? Like, this has continued, you know, especially after we enter the war in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2001 and 2003, our military budget is going to expand. Okay, let me go back to where I talked. So whenever we are looking at Reaganomics, whenever Reagan entered office, he was dealing with stagflation, right? Unemployment was up, and so was inflation. Reaganomics will solve that problem. We look at this next one, we begin to see the decrease in inflation, unemployment, and interest rates after just a couple of years. Beginning in 1983, we see stagflation end and the economy begins to boom. The US gained 16 million new jobs, unemployment fell, and inflation decreased by a lot. However, at the same time, we're seeing an increase in defense spending. So during the Reagan era, they are going to spend more in peacetime on the military than we were spending in the midst of the Vietnam War. So the defense budget is going to explode. The purpose for increasing the defense budget was to restore our station as a superpower, right? To have the biggest military in the world, and to restore Americans' confidence in their country. So in 1984, are Americans happy with Reagan's performance?
Yes.
Yes. Red on this map is Reagan. So he won in a huge landslide in 1984. So this is after a year of, the economy doing well and beginning to boom. That's going to be the primary contributing factor. We see a lot of people switch parties. They're known as Reagan Democrats. They vote for Reagan, but then they vote for a Democratic governor. So he is going to create this huge coalition of people who typically would vote Democrat, but switch to the Republican Party. The Supreme Court is going to become more conservative under Reagan. He's able to appoint 2 Supreme Court justices. He was able to name the Chief Justice, and he chose a man named William Rehnquist, and then he also chose the first female Supreme Court justice. Sandra Day O'Connor was confirmed to the Supreme Court in 1981. How many women have we had since Sandra Day O'Connor? Yes, the president chooses Supreme Court. They have to be confirmed by the Senate, but the president chooses those. So after Sandra Day O'Connor, we had Ruth Bader Ginsburg named in the 90s. And then after RBG, we didn't have another female Supreme Court justice until Obama named 2 during his presidency. And then we've just recently seen the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. So in total, we've had 5 female Supreme Court justices. There's a popular saying, you may have seen it in the wake of RBG's death because she was the one who said it, when there are 9. Have y'all seen that or heard that? It was her response to a question. Somebody asked her, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? Because at one point there were 3, her and the 2 Obama nominees. And her answer was, when there are 9. Right, which is the number of Supreme Court justices. And a lot of people were really taken aback at that answer. You want every single justice to be a woman? And she was like, well, for hundreds of years, every single justice was a man. So what is the difference there? So if you see that phrase, when there are 9, that is what it's referencing to. All right, last thing we'll talk about today. even though the Supreme Court got more conservative, this the decision on this case is something that continues to be controversial, specifically with people who consider themselves conservative or Republican. What was happening was anti-Reagan protesters decided to burn an American flag as protest. Some dude was arrested and he was tried and convicted for burning an American flag. And so he appealed and said that it was within his First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, to burn the American flag. And the Supreme Court agreed with that. In Texas versus Johnson in 1989, they issued the ruling that people have a right to burn the American flag as protest because that falls under freedom of speech. So obviously this is an issue that affects people in different ways, right? Like if you're someone who has served in the military, the flag as a symbol might mean more to you. So a lot of people, if you ask them like, should flag burning be legal? Majority of Americans would say no, but like, that is one of the things that makes America different. And what Americans like about America is the freedom of speech and the ability to protest your government and criticize it freely, which is something that, you know, around the world, we're in the minority of. So even though, you know, you may not personally agree with burning the American flag, right? It is something that, you know, having the right to do is important. And a lot of times if you ask like, you know, military members about like their viewpoint on, you know, kneeling for the American flag or doing things in protest of it, you know, some of them are very much against it because they fought for that flag. But a lot of people are like, you know, I also fought for the freedom for you to do that. So it continues to be a controversial issue. I've seen it come up several times in the last few years with the protests that we've had, people burning flags and talking about whether that's appropriate or not. To clarify, it's not appropriate, right? People do it as an act of protest. It's supposed to be something shocking and that causes people to pay attention.